So our topic is now food chain. What is a food chain? A food chain said to be a linear. This is very simple definition for food chain. It is a linear feeding relationship between organisms termed as food chain. Means ke from one organism to another organism there will be a single arrow, and these organisms, they are in the form of a chain. So this chain is unidirectional, so it is a linear feeding relationship. One eats the other organism. Another definition is transfer of energy from source in plants through a series of organisms with repeated eating and being eaten is called as the food chain. For example, sun energy is trapped by the green plants, autotrophs. These green plants, they are, for example, being eaten by a caterpillar. The caterpillar is in turn is being eaten by a sparrow, and the sparrow is eaten by a hawk, right? So at each trophic level, there is a single organism present. This type of feeding relationship is called as a food chain. Trophic level is that each level of feeding is termed as a trophic level, or each level of nourishment is termed as a trophic level. So हम यहाँ food chain में देखते हैं कि हम एक हर trophic level पे एक ही organism को represent कर रहे हैं. Now the components of a food chain. Food chain is comprised of herbivore. At the base of every food chain, you will find a plant. Then there will be those organisms which are eating the plant, that is the herbivores. Then the carnivores. The carnivores, they have different categories: primary carnivores, secondary carnivores, tertiary carnivores. Then the omnicarnivores, right, which can omnivores, which can eat both the plants as well as the animals. Then the decomposers, parasites, scavengers, saprophytes, they can also be the part of the food chain. Energy stored in the plants is passed away through the food chain. जो एनर्जी जो है सनलाइट की वो जो प्लांट स्टोर करते हैं वो फूड चेन के थ्रू इट इज पास्ड ऑनवर्ड टू द other organisms. So at each transfer, about 80 to 90% of the energy that is lost as heat or for the purpose of respiration. You see this diagram. At each trophic level, from the producer when it goes to the consumer, some of the energy is lost in the form of heat, and some of the energy is also lost in the form of respiration. So it is said that about 80 to 90% of the energy is lost in the at each trophic level when the energy is passing from one trophic level to the other. So that's why the number of links in a food chain, they are about 4 to 5, because there is a great loss of energy at each level. About that's why हम देखते हैं कि food chain के अंदर हमें 4 to 5 links यानी इतने ही trophic levels मिलते हैं, so that by the time the food reach to the last consumer, there will be very less amount of energy available. So shorter the food chain, greater will be the availability of energy. So that's why only a few links are present in case of food chain. Now how we draw a diagram for the food chain. You see, a food chain consists of a series of arrows, right? And these arrows, they point from one species to another species. I have drawn a diagram for this food chain in which you see a number of arrows, they are present and they are pointing from one organism to the other organism. this organism is serving as a source of food for this one, next one, herbivores. Herbivores are serving as a source of food for primary carnivores, and so on. So the traditional food chains, when they are drawn, they have a producer at the bottom. Producer is an autotroph, it will be at the bottom. And the successive organisms, they will be herbivores, primary consumers, secondary consumers, and tertiary consumers, and so on. These all are connected with the help of arrows. So ये एक particular जो food chain draw की जाती है, this is always drawn like this, that different arrows, they are connecting the organisms. So it will lead from the organism which is being eaten to the organism which is eating it. And usually the decomposers, they are not shown to be the part of the food chain. So the decomposers are not included usually when you draw a diagram for the food chain. Now what are the advantages of the food chain? के ये food chain जो है उसके advantages क्या हैं? So you see this food chain, it describes the pathway of energy flow. आपको पता चलता है कि energy flow जो है वो उसका pathway क्या है? It is flowing from the sun to the autotrophs, then the herbivores, and then the consumers. So ये आपको arrows की help से the flow of energy जो है उसका pathway you can determine. Then the food chain studies help to understand the feeding relationship and the interactions between the organisms in any ecosystem. The third advantage of the food chain is that it helps you to comprehend the energy flow mechanism. कि आप energy flow mechanism को उसकी help से you can understand. And the material circulation in the ecosystem, that will also be understandable, and you can also understand the movement of toxic substances in the ecosystem. So the flow of nutrients, in which direction it is taking place, how the flow of the toxic materials in the ecosystem is taking place, all these information you can get from when you are studying the food chains. Now you have different types of food chains. Over here we have different types of food chains. There will be a grazing food chain, detritus food chain, and supplementary food chain. One by one we see what are the characteristics of these different types of food chains. First of all, we have grazing food chain. It will start from a green plant at the base, and for example, after the green plant, we will be having a grazing herbivore. For example, if it is starting from a plant, there will be a cattle grazing on the pasture land. Then, for example, it can also be represented like this, that there will be a rabbit feeding on the grass. Another example can be that of an insect pest which is feeding on the crop. So all these will be the examples of grazing food chain. At the base, you will be having a plant.
मैम आपकी आवाज स्लो हो गई है.
सिग्नल तो पूरे हैं, आप चेक करो कनेक्शन.
अब ठीक है मैम, अब ठीक है.
अच्छा. So I was telling about the grazing food chain, that at the base of this grazing food chain you will be having a plant, and then some of the organism which will be eating that plant. So उसमें तीन examples मैंने आपको बताई. Cattle grazing in a pasture or grassland, rabbit feeding on the grass, insect pest feeding on the crop. All these will be the example of grazing food chain. Then you have, and so on, these are animals, they will be further eaten by certain carnivore. Then you have a detritus food chain. This is the example which I have drawn over here. It will start from the dead organic matter to the, अगर यहाँ पे हम सेप्रोफाइट्स को कंसिडर करें, So it will start from the dead organic matter. For example, there are mangrove leaves, right? Mangrove leaves, they are in their fragmented form. They will be first of all attacked by the saprophytes. Saprophytes will be either fungi, bacteria, or protozoa, right? Then there can be another pathway in which the detritus organisms, which will be the for example, mollusks, they will be the nematodes, they will be the crabs, they will attack on these leaves, and these will in turn be eaten by certain large or small game fish, herons, storks, fish eating birds, etc. So in this way this food chain will operate. So there can be two pathway for this food chain. One, these organic matter, they will be attacked by the saprophytes. Saprophytes will be fungi, bacteria, or protozoan, or they will be attacked by the detritus, which will be certain animals.